Hey, the New York Times, remember they used to always write articles about how problematic the Nazis were in Ukraine? Before 2022, they couldn't wait to document all the Western press, all the stories about Nazis, far right from Europe, Ukrainian Nazis, Kiev's far right groups refused to disarm, all the Nazis everywhere. And even Bellingcat was saying it. Yes, it's still okay to call Ukrainians neo-Nazis. Everybody was saying it. Everybody. And I say Bellingcat because they work for the government. That's why it's a big deal. So before this Ukraine war, everybody was talking about how the Nazis in Ukraine. But then as soon as the war happened, that's over, right? Aaron Mate points it out. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because the New York Times has finally addressed it. They're finally, look at Aaron Mate says, in July 2015, Azov is openly neo-Nazi. That's what the West press said. And then after the war started, hey, they're celebrated. You think I'm kidding that they're celebrated? Commanders of Ukraine celebrated Azov Battalion. They are celebrated. They used to say this. They used to say White Hammer and the Trident of Stepan Bandera, the Azov group, is openly neo-Nazi, using the wolf's hook symbol. That's what they used to say. Now they call them the celebrated Azov Battalion. Isn't that amazing? That's the New York Times. So they used to call them openly neo-Nazis, and now they call them celebrated. It's the same newspaper. You see how propaganda works? So now they came out with this new article. It says Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issue of history. So they're making it look like these guys are just nostalgic. Well, here, I'll give it to you. Since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine last year, the Ukrainian government and NATO allies have posted, then quietly deleted, 3 seemingly innocuous photographs from their social media feeds. A soldier standing in a group, another resting in a trench, and an emergency worker posing in front of a truck. Why would they delete those photos? Well, in each photograph, Ukrainians in uniform wore patches featuring symbols that were made notorious by Nazi Germany and have since become part of the iconography of far-right hate groups. Oh, darn the luck. The photographs and their deletions highlight the Ukrainian military's complicated relationship with Nazi imagery. Not with Nazis, but with Nazi imagery. Gosh darn it to luck. A relationship forged under both Soviet and German occupation during World War II. The relationship has become especially delicate. The relationship between the Ukrainians and their Nazi imagery, that's the relationship that's become especially delicate because President Vladimir Putin of Russia has falsely declared Ukraine to be a Nazi state. It is a Nazi state, a claim he has used to justify his illegal invasion. Ukraine has worked for years through legislation and military restructuring to contain a fringe, far-right movement whose members proudly wear symbols steeped in Nazi history and espouse views hostile to leftist LGBTQ movements and ethnic minorities. Well, if they're so fringe and far right, you think you'd be able to stamp them out of your own goddamn military. But you don't. Isn't that something? They're so tiny, you can't get rid of them. They're so powerless, can't get rid of them. But some members of these groups have been fighting Russia since the Kremlin illegally annexed part of the Crimea region in Ukraine in 2014. Do you see this propaganda? And are now part of the broader military structure. Some are regarded as national heroes. Even as the far right remains marginalized politically, they are not marginalized politically. This is all garbage from the New York Times. This is amazing to watch. This is like the iconography of these groups, including a skull and crossbones patch worn by the concentration camp guards and a symbol known as the Black Sun, now appears with some regularity on the uniforms of soldiers fighting on the front line. I thought it was just a small little part of it. There's nothing, it's a fringe. But they appear, this fringe is everywhere. That's not what, I don't think you know what fringe means. Including soldiers who say the imagery symbolizes Ukrainian sovereignty and pride, not Nazism. The KKK, they wear those hoods because they're light-skinned and the sun will burn them. Not as a sign of hate. It's about heritage, not hate.
Mm-hmm.
It's about our heritage. In the short term, that threatens to reinforce Mr. Putin's propaganda. So the fact that there is Nazi symbols all over the place in their military now, that is a problem because it reinforces Putin's propaganda that they're all frickin' Nazis. And there they are walking around wearing the Nazi symbols, and now people are going to think it's true. That's what they're saying in the New York Times. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. The problem is that Putin's lying, saying there's a bunch of Nazis in Ukraine, and then the Ukraine soldiers all start wearing Nazi insignia, and that's going to make people think that that's true. Well, why wouldn't they just stop wearing the Nazi insignia? Well, it's their heritage. They don't understand. That's what they're going to say. You ready? You think I'm kidding? More broadly, Ukraine's ambivalence about these symbols, they have ambivalence. And sometimes even its acceptance of them risks giving new mainstream life to icons that the West has spent more than a half century trying to eliminate. Oh, it's just these stupid dummies don't know what they're doing when they put on these swastikas. What worries me in the Ukrainian context is that people in Ukraine who are in leadership positions, either they don't or they're not willing to acknowledge and understand how these symbols are viewed outside Ukraine, says this fucking liar who works for Bellingcat. That's the people, they're just hard-headed inside Ukraine military. They don't get how it looks when you run around wearing Nazi symbols. They don't get, I'm even doing this now. I think Ukrainians need to increasingly realize that these images undermine support for the country. They don't understand that. This is the New York Times. Of course it is. So far, the imagery has not eroded international support for the war. Yes, it has. It has, however, left diplomats, Western journalists, and advocacy groups in a difficult position, calling attention to the iconography risks playing into the Russian propaganda. It's not true. They just all like wearing Nazi shit. It's not true that they're Nazis. They just like wearing Nazi shit. And we can't get them to stop. Saying nothing also allows it to spread, meaning the propaganda. Even Jewish groups and anti-hate organizations that have traditionally called out hateful symbols have stayed largely silent. I wonder why. You think it could be because everybody who does point this out gets called a Putin puppet and smeared, and they tried to cancel them? You think maybe that's why? Privately, some leaders have worried about being seen as embracing Russian propaganda talking points. Really? Just privately? Of course that's what this is. That's how pro-war propaganda works. Just like during the Iraq War, they called you a Saddam apologist if you said they didn't have weapons of mass. They did that. Same thing Libya. Same thing Syria. They called you an Assadist. That's how it works. Now they call you a Putin puppet. That's how pro-war propaganda works. Anybody who stands up and tells the truth about the war, they slander them as a traitor. In April, Ukraine's defense ministry posted a photograph on its Twitter account of a soldier wearing a patch featuring a skull and crossbones known as the Totenkopf, or Death's Head. The specific symbol in the picture was made notorious by a Nazi unit that committed war crimes and guarded concentration camps during World War II. That patch is the official merchandise of Death in June, a British neo-folk band that the Southern Poverty Law Center has said produces hate speech that exploits themes of images of fascism and Nazism. The Anti-Defamation League considers the Totenkopf a common hate symbol, but Jake Hyman, a spokesperson for the group, said it was impossible to make an inference about the wearer or the Ukrainian army based on the patch. Really, you pro-war fucking maniac? The image, while offensive, is that of a musical band. You fucking... Dude, how can people still read the New York Times? I swear to God, it's beyond belief. Who wrote this piece of shit? The band now uses the photograph posted by the Ukrainian military to market the Totenkopf patch. The soldier in the photograph was part of a volunteer unit called the Da Vinci Wolves, which started as a part of the paramilitary wing of Ukrainian's White Right Sector, a coalition of right-wing organizations and political parties that militarized after Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. The people of Crimea voted to join Russia. Overwhelmingly, they all speak Russian. They all want to be part of Russia. At least 5 other photographs on the Wolves' Instagram and Facebook pages feature their soldiers wearing Nazi-style patches, including the Totenkopf. Units like the Da Vinci Wolves, the better-known Azov Regiment, and others that began with far-right members have been folded into the Ukrainian military and have been instrumental in defending Ukraine from Russian troops. So that they're making them out to be good guys. These are the good. They're fighting the Russians. The Azov Regiment was celebrated after holding out during the siege of the southern city of Mariupol last year. After the commander of the Da Vinci Wolves was killed in March, he received a hero's funeral, which Mr. Zelensky attended. I know, he's in bed with the Nazis. So that's the New York Times trying to whitewash the Nazism of Ukraine. Glenn Greenwald says, amazing article from the New York Times about the rather uncomfortable fact that photos of Ukrainian soldiers and leading battalions so often include Nazi symbols and Nazi flags. For a decade, the Western press warned Ukraine's fighters were dominated by Nazi units. U.S. liberals are currently the world's #1 apologists for Nazis, and it's not even close. Here, the New York Times grudgingly acknowledges Ukraine's Nazi problem, not because they're Nazis, but because their Nazism threatens to reinforce Russian propaganda. Viva Frey, friend of the show, says the problem is not the presence of Nazis in Ukraine and the Ukraine military. The problem is that Putin will exploit this fact to demonize them as Nazis. Did I get this right? You got it right, Viva. You got it right. Will Menaker tweets out, just so long as they aren't fans of Roger Waters. That's funny. Okay, so there you go. New York Times doing their best propaganda. Try to whitewash Nazis. Keep fucking voting for Democrats and Republicans and keep reading your stupid corporate news. Thank you. Hey, everybody, only $10 to go see my new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny, at jimmydore.com. And come see us do a live show. We're going to be in Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Bakersfield, California, Baltimore, San Francisco, Huntington Beach, Rosemont, and Chicago, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and more. We're going to be in New York, Stamford, Connecticut, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, San Diego, everywhere. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all our tickets.